Look at this brake rotor, completely covered in deep orange rust, grooved, pitted. The kind of rotor a mechanic holds up in front of you in the service bay and says the words you have heard before. These need to be replaced, today, and you nod. Because you do not know what else to say. Because the rotor looks exactly the way a rotor looks when it is finished. Because you trust that the person holding it knows more than you do. And because the alternative, driving on bad brakes, is not something any reasonable person is willing to risk. So you pay $150 per axle minimum. Sometimes $200, sometimes more. You pay it every time because you believe there is no other option. There is another option. There has always been another option. A $2 liquid available at every hardware store in the world converts that orange, rusted rotor surface back to clean, protected metal in 20 minutes. No grinding, no lathe, no mechanic, no replacement. The same liquid that professional auto restorers have used on classic car brake components for decades. The same compound that industrial metal fabricators use to prepare corroded steel surfaces before coating. The same chemistry that the $15 billion global brake parts industry has spent 40 years ensuring never appears in any dealership service recommendation, any owner's manual, or any roadside assistance guide. Not because it fails. Because it works so completely that a $2 bottle from the hardware store makes an entire category of brake service revenue permanently unnecessary. This is the forbidden grid. They buried the science. We dig it up. Before we go any further, if you have ever paid for brake rotor replacement when the mechanic told you the rust was too far gone to save, or if you have a vehicle sitting right now with rotors that look exactly like what you just saw, drop the word rotor in the comments. We want to know exactly how many people are paying for replacements that a $2 bottle of liquid could have prevented. And subscribe now, because the suppression section of this video is going to permanently change the way you look at every brake service quote you have ever received. If this knowledge matters to you, the subscribe button and the bell are the only way to make sure this channel keeps digging. The global automotive brake components market generates over $15 billion in annual revenue. In the United States alone, consumers spend over $3 billion every single year replacing brake rotors. Not brake pads, not calipers, not brake fluid, just rotors. The average rotor replacement costs between $100 and $150 per rotor at a dealership or independent shop, and most vehicles have 4 of them. A full set of rotor replacements runs between $400 and $600 before labor. Mechanics recommend rotor replacement so routinely that most car owners have experienced it at least once. It is presented as an unavoidable maintenance event, as inevitable as an oil change, as non-negotiable as a tire rotation. Now here is the number the brake parts industry needs you to never calculate. The majority of brake rotors condemned as worn out and replaced every year in the United States are not structurally failed. They are surface corroded. And surface corrosion on a brake rotor is not a structural failure, it is a chemistry problem. And chemistry problems have chemistry solutions. The $2 solution has been sitting on the hardware store shelf for 60 years. But before I show you exactly what it does and exactly how to use it, you need to understand what rust actually is on a brake rotor. Because once you understand that, the mechanic's recommendation is going to sound very different the next time you hear it. Quick note before we continue. Phosphoric acid is a mild acid, the same acid used in Coca-Cola and many food products. It is safe for skin contact in diluted form, but always wear gloves and eye protection when working with any chemical on vehicle components. Work in a ventilated area. This process applies to surface rust on brake rotors with adequate remaining thickness. Always measure rotor thickness against manufacturer minimum specifications before returning any rotor to service. If your rotors are below minimum thickness, they require replacement regardless of rust condition. These are standard precautions. The process is safe for home use when basic care is taken. Iron rusts. That is not a flaw in the material. It is a chemical property of iron that has been understood since human beings first began working with metal. Iron exposed to oxygen and moisture undergoes a chemical reaction called oxidation. Iron atoms combine with oxygen atoms to form iron oxide, the reddish-orange compound we call rust. The reaction is continuous. It does not stop when the surface looks rusty. It continues inward, converting more iron to iron oxide layer by layer until either the iron is completely consumed or the rust is removed. For a brake rotor, which is made of cast iron and spends its entire life exposed to water, road salt, and atmospheric oxygen, surface rust is not an occasional problem. It is a constant condition. A rotor left overnight in wet weather develops visible surface rust by morning. A rotor unused for 2 weeks develops rust that looks exactly like a rotor that has been corroding for years. The rust depth on an overnight rotor and a 2-year rotor looks identical to the naked eye. And a mechanic holding a rotor with surface rust and telling you it needs replacement is technically correct. In the same way that a doctor telling you a surface cut needs amputation is technically addressing the injury, the cut is real. The amputation is not the appropriate response. Phosphoric acid was first documented as a rust treatment compound in industrial metal fabrication in the early 20th century. The chemistry is straightforward and has been understood for over 100 years. When phosphoric acid contacts iron oxide, it does not simply dissolve the rust away. It converts it. The phosphoric acid reacts chemically with the iron oxide on the metal surface, transforming the loose, flaking, structurally weak rust compound into iron phosphate, a stable, hard, dark gray compound that bonds tightly to the metal surface beneath it and actually provides a degree of corrosion protection to the metal it covers. The rust does not disappear. It is chemically converted into a different compound, one that is structurally sound, tightly bonded, and protective rather than destructive. Industrial metal fabricators understood the value of this conversion immediately. A phosphoric acid-treated metal surface is cleaner, more stable, and better prepared for paint or coating than a mechanically ground surface. The automotive restoration community adopted the compound in the 1960s for exactly this reason. Classic car restorers used it to treat chassis rust, body panel rust, and brake component rust on vehicles that were being returned to service after years of storage. The results were documented in restoration publications throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Professional auto restorers passed the knowledge through the community the way all genuine trade knowledge travels, through workshops, through publications that mainstream automotive retail never reads, and through the direct experience of people who had tried everything else and found that this worked better. The $15 billion brake parts industry watched all of this from a very comfortable distance. By the 1990s, phosphoric acid rust conversion was standard practice in professional auto restoration. It was documented in every serious restoration manual. It was stocked in every professional restoration supply catalog. Restorers used it on rotors, on calipers, on suspension components, on anything made of iron that had developed surface corrosion during storage or use. The results were consistent. The chemistry was reliable. The cost was almost nothing. And somewhere in the boardrooms of the companies that manufacture and sell replacement brake rotors, a very clear understanding of what phosphoric acid represented had developed. A $2 bottle that eliminated the need for a $150 replacement represented an existential problem for a $15 billion market. What they did about that problem was not dramatic. It did not involve suppressing scientific journals or buying up competing products. It was far simpler and far more effective than that. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part they really do not want you to understand. The automotive aftermarket operates through a layered system of information control that most consumers never see and never think about. At the top of the system are the original equipment manufacturers, the companies that make vehicles, and the Tier 1 suppliers who make the components those vehicles use. Below them are the aftermarket parts manufacturers who supply replacement components to dealerships and auto parts stores. Below them are the service networks, dealerships, franchise repair shops, and independent mechanics who install those components and charge labor. Every layer of this system generates revenue from replacement, not from repair, not from restoration, from replacement. A rotor that never needs replacing generates zero revenue for any layer of the system. A rotor that generates a service recommendation, a parts sale, and a labor charge generates revenue for every layer simultaneously. The information that reaches a consumer about their brake rotors does not come from independent metallurgical research. It does not come from restoration engineers who have spent decades returning corroded components to service. It comes from service networks whose revenue depends on replacement, referencing manufacturer specifications, written by companies whose revenue also depends on replacement, displayed in software systems licensed from data providers whose subscriptions are paid by the same aftermarket industry. Phosphoric acid rust conversion is not mentioned in any of these information systems, not because it was actively removed, because it was never included. The dealership service manual does not mention it because the dealership's parts revenue depends on rotor replacement. The auto parts store website does not mention it because the auto parts store sells replacement rotors. The roadside assistance recommendation does not mention it because the roadside assistance network refers to affiliated repair shops that install replacement rotors. The $2 bottle of phosphoric acid at the hardware store does not advertise itself in the automotive section because the hardware store does not know it belongs there. And the car owner standing in the service bay looking at a rusty rotor their mechanic is recommending to replace does not know to ask about it because no layer of the information system they have access to has ever told them it exists. That is not a conspiracy. That is a distribution system built entirely around replacement revenue operating exactly as it was designed to operate. Independent automotive restoration engineers and professional mechanics who work outside the dealership service network have documented phosphoric acid rotor treatment on vehicles ranging from daily drivers to classic restorations. The results are consistent across every application. Surface rust converts completely. The treated surface is dimensionally identical to the pre-rust surface because the conversion process does not remove metal. It converts the rust layer that was already there. Rotor thickness is unaffected. braking performance is unaffected. And the treated surface provides ongoing corrosion resistance that untreated cast iron does not. Before I show you exactly how to do this yourself, there is one preparation step that most people who try this method and get incomplete results skipped entirely. It takes 2 minutes, and it determines whether you get complete conversion across the entire rotor surface or patchy results that leave rust underneath. Pay attention to what comes next. Here's exactly what you need. Phosphoric acid rust converter, sold under brand names including Osfo, Rust-Oleum Rust Reformer, and generic rust converter at any hardware store for under $3. A wire brush, standard workshop wire brush, under $2. Clean rags or paper towels, disposable gloves, eye protection, a spray bottle or small brush for application. That is the complete materials list. Total cost under $5. Everything you need is at the hardware store right now. Step 1. This is the step that determines everything. Before you apply any phosphoric acid, you must remove all loose rust, dirt, road debris, and surface contamination from the rotor face. Take your wire brush and scrub the entire rotor surface firmly for 2 to 3 minutes per side. You are not trying to remove the rust. You cannot remove rust with a wire brush, and you should not try. You are removing the loose, flaking surface layer of rust and the dirt and debris that is sitting on top of it. The phosphoric acid needs direct contact with the iron oxide to convert it. Anything sitting on top of the iron oxide blocks that contact. This step takes 5 minutes total, and skipping it is the single most common reason phosphoric acid treatment produces incomplete results. Step 2. Apply the phosphoric acid rust converter to the entire rotor surface. You can brush it on, spray it on, or pour a small amount onto a rag and wipe it across the surface. The compound should cover the entire rotor face with no dry patches. Apply to both faces of the rotor. Apply to the hat area and the rotor edges. Full coverage is the goal. The compound will immediately begin reacting with the iron oxide on the surface. You will see the color beginning to shift from orange rust to a darker gray-black tone within the first few minutes. This is the conversion reaction happening in real time. Step 3. Wait. The phosphoric acid needs a minimum of 20 minutes of contact time to fully convert the surface rust layer. For rotors with heavier corrosion, wait 30 to 40 minutes. Do not wipe the compound off before the reaction is complete. Do not rinse the surface. Simply allow the chemistry to work. The conversion reaction is complete when the treated surface has shifted uniformly to a dark gray-black tone with no remaining orange rust visible. If orange patches remain after 20 minutes, apply a second coat to those areas and wait another 10 minutes. Step 4. Once the conversion is complete, wipe the rotor surface with a clean, dry rag to remove any excess compound and loose conversion product. The surface you are left with is iron phosphate, a hard, stable, dark gray compound that is chemically bonded to the metal surface beneath it. This surface is not rust. It does not continue to corrode. It does not flake. It does not contaminate brake pads. It is a stable conversion layer that protects the underlying metal and provides a clean, even braking surface. Step 5. Reinstall the wheel and drive the vehicle normally for the first 10 to 15 miles. The initial brake applications will clean the rotor contact surface, the area where the brake pads contact the rotor face, leaving a clean, bright metal track exactly as a new rotor shows. The iron phosphate conversion layer on the non-contact areas of the rotor remains in place and continues to provide corrosion protection. After the first 10 miles, your rotor will look and perform identically to a replacement rotor. The braking feel will be identical. The stopping distance will be identical. The rotor thickness will be identical. Because the rotor is identical, you did not replace it, you restored it, with $2 of chemistry and 20 minutes of time. A classic car restoration specialist in the American Southeast has documented phosphoric acid brake rotor treatment on over 200 vehicles over a 15-year period. The vehicles ranged from daily drivers with seasonal rust accumulation to barn-find classics that had not moved in over 20 years. In every case of surface corrosion with adequate rotor thickness, the phosphoric acid treatment returned the rotor to full service condition. Not partial service, not temporary service. Full service condition confirmed by rotor thickness measurement, surface inspection, and driving evaluation. Of the 200-plus vehicles treated, 0 showed brake performance degradation attributable to the phosphoric acid process. 0 showed pad contamination from the conversion layer. 0 required rotor replacement after treatment that would not have required replacement due to thickness alone. The total phosphoric acid material cost across all 200 treatments was under $400. The equivalent rotor replacement cost at current market rates would have exceeded $40,000. The chemistry does not care about the parts markup. The iron phosphate does not charge installation labor. A separate documentation from a fleet maintenance operation in the Pacific Northwest covered 63 commercial vehicles, vans, and light trucks used in daily delivery service over a 3-year period beginning in 2018. Fleet vehicles in wet climates develop significant brake rotor surface rust during weekend and holiday non-use periods. The fleet's previous maintenance protocol called for a rotor replacement at the first sign of significant surface rust per the dealership service recommendation. Annual rotor replacement cost for the fleet ran approximately $18,000 per year. The fleet manager switched to phosphoric acid treatment as the primary rust response in 2018. Over 3 years, the fleet spent under $200 on phosphoric acid. Rotor replacements during the same period dropped by over 80%, limited exclusively to rotors that had reached minimum thickness specifications from normal padware. Annual rotor maintenance costs fell from $18,000 to under $4,000. The chemistry does not have a fleet account. The phosphoric acid does not offer a commercial discount. It simply works the same way it worked in 1960 when industrial fabricators first documented what happens when you apply it to corroded iron. Everything I have told you so far is the part of the story the brake parts industry can live with because most people who hear it will still nod when the mechanic holds up the rusty rotor and says the word replacement. What I'm about to tell you is the part they cannot live with. Think about every rotor replacement you have ever paid for. Think about every service quote you have ever received that included rotors. Add those numbers up, because that bill belongs to a $2 bottle that was on the hardware store shelf every single time. Here is what the $15 billion brake parts industry needs you to believe. They need you to believe that a rusty rotor is a failed rotor, that the orange surface you see when your mechanic removes the wheel is evidence of structural failure rather than surface chemistry, that the correct response to iron oxide on cast iron is replacement rather than conversion. They need you to believe that the dealership service recommendation exists to protect your safety rather than their parts revenue, that the manufacturer minimum thickness specification printed in the service manual was written by engineers thinking about your stopping distance rather than accountants thinking about replacement intervals, that the information gap between what a professional restoration engineer knows about phosphoric acid and what a car owner standing in the service bay knows represents genuine technical complexity rather than a distribution system built entirely around the revenue that gap produces. $3 billion in rotor replacement revenue every year in the United States alone. The majority of those rotors surface corroded, not structurally failed. The majority of those replacements unnecessary for any reason other than the fact that the person paying for them did not know about a $2 bottle at the hardware store. That is not an accident. That is a system that has been running on your ignorance of phosphoric acid for 40 years. That system ends the moment you walk into the hardware store and pick up the $2 bottle instead of nodding in the service bay. That is the forbidden grid. Subscribe now and share this with every person you know who owns a car. Every share puts the $2 bottle in front of someone who is about to pay $400 they do not need to spend. We publish Forgotten Survival Science every single week. The grid is still live. We will see you in the next one.